The Callisto Protocol begins like all good prison films do, with a mood of unbearable doom. Working man pilot Jacob Lee has crash-landed on the dead moon of Callisto, after his cargo ship is boarded by a notorious terrorist group and promptly arrested. Before long though, a mysterious disaster turns the inhabitants of Black Iron Prison into crazed mutants. The Callisto Protocol wastes no time in cementing the terror of its setting. Now we just need to walk its mostly straight line for 15 hours and butcher our way through it. The opening hours have everything. Claustrophobic rooms with gushing valves and sparking wires, access halls made of aged steel, echoing vents, flickering holographic terminals, and crawl spaces full of slimy filth. By the game's end, there are some surprising deviations from grim, dark corridor. Is this Dead Space 4, or the Dead Space 3 that many think should have been? Pretty much both. The director of the Callisto Protocol is Glenn Schofield, who directed the first two Dead Space games, and he has adopted the game's honed balance of powerful, yet oh so vulnerable. And it does feel like Dead Space, particularly Dead Space 2, one of my favourite games, to the point where it even takes some scenes directly from that game. I don't fault Schofield for returning to this formula, and it results in a morbid type of comforting familiarity. The Callisto Protocol takes a rhythmic approach to hand-to-hand combat, and it took a good few hours to effectively nail the time of the ostensibly simple evasion system. But when it comes to the actual bludgeoning, it's satisfyingly vicious, especially when peppered with point-blank shotgun rounds. Lee has a glowing green bar on the back of his head that indicates health, and another blue one that indicates whether his GRP has overheated. The GRP, or grip, is the Callisto Protocol's answer to Control's Levitate, or Half-Life 2's Gravity Gun, or, you know, the Kinesis module. It's great fun, letting you throw objects at enemies, or, as a new addition, picking them up and hurling them into an alarming amount of wall-mounted spikes that litter this moon colony. This addition of a delete button into survival horror is disorienting at first, but the game gradually compensates for it. After receiving the grip, I forgot I had it for a while, but once I learned to go into every combat situation with an alertness to environmental hazards, the game's approach to combat clicked. I don't find any of the warted, veined, saliva-abundant baddies especially scary, if only because I've played a lot of horror games with enemies just like these, but there are a few loathsome predators that were the exception. It's not the appearance of these more fearsome mutants that's threatening, but how they move around the environments. There's also the ever-lingering threat that if you don't shoot the emerging tentacles off a mutant, they'll morph into something more formidable. Checkpoints are generous, leading to very few meaningful restarts, but I was occasionally annoyed by checkpoint placements. Often I would spend 5 minutes selling loot and upgrading weapons at a workstation, only to die shortly after, necessitating the transaction again. I died a lot in the second half of the game, but at least there was the disgusting novelty of a new death scene. These naturally repeat themselves, with some kept for mid to late game, but there are a lot of them, and they are most astonishingly gross. They're not particularly shocking per se, but gross in the Stephen King Danse Macabre sense. This is a roller coaster video game, riddled with cinematic video game cliches. In a lot of ways, the Callisto Protocol feels like a new, albeit well-qualified studio singing to the crowd, and it's safe to bet that the crowd will keep singing along. In terms of performance, with a 3080 it ran below 60 FPS with ray tracing on, but then jumped to about 100 as soon as I turned it off. Setting FSR 2.0 to performance mode gave me a whole extra 3.5 FPS, and no other settings made a noticeable difference. There were definitely some stutters even after that, especially in moments where the camera control is taken away or given back on either side of certain pre-canned animations and cutscenes. Those faces do look real nice though. I don't think I've ever seen sweat this believable on a video game character. A big part of me wants a blockbuster horror game to go off the rails a bit, in a way a lot of people hoped Kojima would with Silent Hills, but it's hard to fault the Callisto Protocol for nailing exactly what it sets out to achieve. An engaging, linear sci-fi survival horror that spins its deepening dystopian yarn around dozens of stressful encounters.
Isn't about escape, Jacob. Not anymore.
What's it about?
Answers!
As you wish. Soon everything will become clear. The truth of Black Iron.